Yes, although the manifesto is what they're being elected on. It's what they'll be held to. It's what they'll be asked about the next election. Did you keep your promises and all of that? So it does matter what they say, and does indicate the priorities of the parties. And obviously, the individual candidates, are also to be considered and may think somewhat differently, but they're being elected on this platform. And so it matters what the manifestos say. I agree. What actually happens in practice may well not be what the manifestos say.
Tim Dieppe, a real joy to talk to you again. Now, I know you spent a lot of your time recently analysing the party manifestos. We've sent something out, in fact, via email earlier this week as well. But what we thought is we'd have a brief conversation with yourself around the marriage issues within the manifesto. So this could be a very short conversation, but perhaps we'll talk a little bit more widely. So we'll talk about things relating to marriage. Of course, that's things like gender recognition, all the stuff that's going on there. We might touch on things like family supports in terms of benefits, and also the idea of getting mums out to work as early as possible and childcare and all sorts of. We'll see what comes up, and it might not be comprehensive, but go and look at our previous email, which gives a lot more detail on the manifesto pledges relating to marriage, etc. So let's take it off the top first of all. Marriage, Tim. Do any of the parties actually talk about supporting marriage per se? If we wanted to vote for somebody who really is pro-marriage, what might we think about?
Well, gosh, I mean, the Conservative manifesto I was just looking at a minute ago, there are marriages mentioned twice. Once saying we oppose child marriage, once saying how proud they are about same-sex marriage, enabling
Oh,
marriage for all.
right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's it on their manifesto. I think Labour, if I remember rightly, doesn't even mention marriage at all once in the manifesto. It's not an issue that they are bothered about, and I think Lib Dems they want to recognise humanist marriages.
Yeah.
So they say we want to introduce legal recognition of humanist marriages and allow more choice over how and where weddings take place, which is
Mm.
I don't really mind humanist weddings so much, but allowing weddings to take place wherever you like kind of undermines the sanctity or the sacredness of wedding ceremony potentially. So I'd be concerned about that. But they also plan to extend legal rights, this is the Lib Dems, to cohabiting couples. So that would undermine marriage further because you give more legal rights to non-married couples, and further disincentivize marriage. And they also, celebrate same-sex marriage again, which of course has only served to undermine real marriage as well since it became law. So that's the Liberal Democrats for you. So that's the three main parties on marriage. You have to go elsewhere to see something more on marriage, really. And actually, if you go to Reform, which is the next most influential party, perhaps, or even higher than Lib Dems on surveys and stuff, Reform does propose a 20% transferable marriage tax allowance. Of those top four parties, Reform is the only one that actually says we've got a policy that will benefit families and will benefit marriage and will promote marriage and incentivize marriage. Good for Reform doing that. And a shame that the other parties aren't doing anything like that at all. And they also talk about front-loading child benefits so parents can stay at home with young children as well. This is Reform again. And they want to promote child-friendly app-restricted smartphones and launch an inquiry into social media harms. So quite significantly more pro-family when you get to Reform than the Conservatives or Labour or Lib Dems. Reform is up there and it's in their manifesto and it's very, very clear. And credit to them for having that in there.
And we do have, I mean, there are many parties we could discuss. And there are lots of smaller parties like the SDP and Heritage and some of the national parties, Scottish Family
Yes,
Party, who
yes.
again are very good on, but because they're not fielding candidates all over the country, I suppose you've got to stop somewhere in terms of one's analysis, maybe.
Well, I've done analysis of the smaller parties. I've done analysis of the Scottish Family Party, the Heritage Party, the Christian People's Alliance, and the SDP as well. SDP is quite family friendly as well. And then I've also done an analysis. I don't think it's on our website yet, but will be by the time this interview goes out of the national parties. That's the SNP and the DUP and Plaid Cymru. DUP is quite pro-family. The other two are very, very progressive, unfortunately, and pretty, or yeah, it's not too strong to say anti-family, I'd say, for those.
Yeah, indeed. You picked up on child benefit there, and that's quite. I think the Conservatives again are looking at kind of bridging the old child benefit gap for looking at it on a family basis, not an individual basis. I think
A
for
household
poorer
basis,
families,
yeah.
yeah, household
No,
basis, yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
is a step forward because that does, it is unfair that it's done on an individual basis. And if you do it on a household basis, that benefits households and so encourages families and encourage members of families to stay together. So that is one thing that does benefit families. That is clear in the Conservative Party manifesto. To be fair, they also talk about expanding family hubs into every local authority in England. That's the two policies you can say in the Conservative Party that are clearly pro-family.
But nobody is recognizing the fact that, kids grow up best on a population basis when raised with their married biological mum and dad. No one's promoting that. And also that the thing that keeps you together statistically is not cohabitation, but marriage. And that's the thing that seems to work from a statistical evidence-based point. And you'd think, therefore, in order to bring about the best version of the next generation, the parties might think about promoting that, but it seems to be absent from most of the agendas.
So when you say nobody, obviously there is the Christian People's Alliance, there is the Heritage Party, there are some other groups, but of the mainstream parties, fielding candidates at all the seats, you're quite right. Yes.
So what about then? I mean, the other aspects that are tangential to marriage, the definition of a man and a woman. Where are we at in terms of those things and the main parties and other parties you analysed?
Yes, so the Conservative Party is a bit more robust in standing up against transgender ideology. I mean, obviously, a lot has happened in the 14 years since they've been in power, so they're not blameless in this. But they have said in the manifesto that they promise to define sex in the Equality Act as biological. And that is a step that lots of campaigners have been campaigning for and would change the law and make it very, very clear. How did we ever get to a point where sex is not biological? I don't really know. I mean, that's crazy, isn't it? Anyway, but we now are in a situation where we need to, panic and let's define sex as biological after all. So the Conservative Party have promised to do that, and that would be good. And they have also said that they won't allow the other jurisdictions, Scotland and Wales, to change the definition of sex. So, which they obviously did veto Scotland doing gender self-identification. I think that was last year, wasn't it? The Conservatives also say we will not allow the word woman, quote, to be erased by health services. Words such as breastfeeding, quote, and mother will not be replaced by chest feeding and birthing parents. So they're on a bit of a war against the language there, and wanting to take a strong stance on that. And they're also promising to legislate to ban puberty blockers, and to ensure schools follow the guidance which they've brought out on gender questioning children, which is an encouraging step forward, even if not as good as we would hope it to be. But it is still positive. So Conservatives, reasonably good there on that stuff.
Before we go on to Labour, I mean, they're still willing for a man to change their gender, to accept the Gender Recognition Act. So there's a process you can go through to rewrite your birth certificate without surgery or anything else and pretend that you were born the opposite gender to the one that you actually were born.
Yes, Conservatives support that, and there's no plans and no mention of reversing that in the manifesto, no.
And then once you've done that, of course, you can use the changing rooms that you now newly identify with, whether or not you've had surgery or anything else.
You can. I mean, as the situation is today, you don't even have to do that to, we've got a story in the news, I don't know if you've seen it this week, of some nurses in Darlington.
Absolutely right. Absolutely
and
right.
A man posing as a woman or claiming that he's a woman is using the nurse's changing room and stripping to his underwear, and he is talking about trying to impregnate his girlfriend. So he's fully intact and fully, biologically male and functioning and all of that kind of thing, and quite intimidatingly and threateningly to the women. When are you going to get changed? Why aren't you getting changed? And all of this kind of thing. And of course, and he's not got a gender recognition certificate as far as we can tell. Yeah. And the NHS are like, no, you're being transphobic, not letting him change in the same room as you. and being at all bothered by it. But one of these nurses has actually been sexually abused, and is traumatized by this whole experience. And it's got a lot of attention, that, and it is a problem. Gender recognition at all or not, we need to change the system so that it's clear that biological men cannot enter these kind of spaces, cannot enter female changing rooms like that. So that we need to change this. And I think there is something of a backlash on transgenderism, but it's not fully reflected yet in these manifestos, I think.
So where's Labour on this then?
Well, Labour says they want to modernise, I'm going to quote now, modernise, simplify and reform the intrusive and outdated gender recognition law into a new process. So in other words, they want to make it easier to change gender. And that would mean, in law, that would mean what you're talking about, the Gender Recognition Act, getting a gender recognition certificate, and falsifying your birth certificate and all of that kind of stuff. But they have said they'll retain the need for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria from a specialist doctor. So it's not full-on self-ID. They still want to keep a doctor signing you off somewhere.
Yeah, but that's one doctor, not two, and they want to remove the 2-year living as blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, the bottom line is they do want to make it easier and simplify it. And so, that's the problem. They're fully pro-trans in that sense. And Lib Dems would go fully self-ID, if I remember rightly. Yeah, remove the requirement for medical reports for someone to recognize their transgender identity. So that's full-on self-ID. I can just sign a thing saying, I'm now a woman, and there we are. I'm a woman in law. And you could get into all sorts of trouble for refusing to treat me as a woman.
So you could sign it on the way into the sports centre and sign it again on the way out because you've changed back again.
I don't know if it really would be as flexible as that, Tony.
Yeah. You
I
can
imagine there'll be a bit
you?
of a legal process to actually get a gender recognition certificate, right?
At least to begin with.
But but they're also going to remove what's called the spousal veto, which is where, if you're married, my wife, for example, and I said I want to change to a woman, she'd be able to veto it and say no, because I'm married to a man. I want to remain married to a man. And that's a good policy that should remain in there. And it's somebody enters into a marriage. They're not expecting it to become a same-sex marriage if it was a normal marriage beforehand. But they would remove that, saying they shouldn't have either any medical checks, or even the spouse should have no say in whether someone can legally change gender or not. And the Liberal Democrats go further than that. They want to recognise non-binary identities in law. So then you won't just have men and women, you'll have non-binary too in the legal system, and recognise non-binary gender identity and people who you have to treat as non-binary, or you're supposed to treat them as non-binary, whatever exactly that means. So that's a further sort of rebellion against the way we're made as male and female, I would suggest.
And then the reform, I believe, don't really mention it at all.
No, reform doesn't touch the issue of transgender as in changing gender, other than to say that they will ban transgender ideology in all schools, and to say that all schools and other public facilities must have single-sex facilities, which I presume means that they would make it biological. But I don't. It's not very clear. They don't say that, but their opposition to transgender ideology is expressed in that single promise in education, that they would ban transgender ideology in all schools. They don't say anything about making it easier or harder to change gender.
And why don't we wrap up on the schools thing? Because that's something which exercises a lot of people as well. What kids are being taught, what you're allowed to remove your kids from being taught, etc., etc. Where are the various parties on that?
Well, so the the Conservative Party are saying that you ought to be able to see the lessons that are being taught on sex education and things like that. So
parents want to be able to see. Yeah.
They actually said they want to legislate to give parents a legal right to see what their children are being taught in relationships and sex education. Now that's a good thing. That's encouraging, and I think that's quite right. And exposing what is being taught to the light of public scrutiny is actually what will cause it to be a bit more sensible, and public opinion and people withdraw their children and protest have protested, have withdrawn children from some of the extreme stuff that is taught in schools these days. So if parents have a legal right to withdraw their children, that would be a good thing if the Conservative Party got in and did that. The Labour Party,
I think in manifesto not, but I think in the news recently they've said that they're going to reverse the Conservatives'
that's true.
proposal for guidance around
Gender questioning children.
Gender questioning children and basically get rid of it.
Well, but then Keir Starmer rode back on that, didn't he? Keir Starmer said, maybe we wouldn't get rid of it. So I think they're in a bit of a mix on that, and I think there's divided opinion in the Labour Party on this very issue.
So Tim, I suppose we should also cover conversion therapy, because theoretically that could affect whether we're allowed to talk about marriage being between just one man and one woman, or whether in fact any strict law interprets that as coercive conversion therapy.
Well, I hope not, but I mean, you may well be right, Tony. I mean, so where we are on that is conversion therapy. There has been a shift here because the Conservative Party did promise to ban conversion therapy in the last manifesto, if I remember rightly. And here we are in this manifesto. While it describes conversion therapy in quotes as abhorrent, it says, and I quote, "In the light of the Cass Review final report, it is right to take more time before reaching a final judgment on additional legislation in this area." So they're recognizing that there are real concerns about a legal ban. We already have a professional ban, and that's caused enough problems, which the Cass Review highlights. Like a clinician feels they have to affirm a child's gender identity, otherwise they could be accused of conversion therapy. So the Conservatives have have basically stood back from the brink, said, "Hang on a minute, we're not sure, don't really want to make a promise on this one, let's pause," which is a step forwards or a step backwards, whichever way you think about it. The Labour Party have said they do want to ban conversion therapy, but then they've said that they've added a caveat in there. They've said that they want to give people the opportunity to explore their sexual orientation, freedom for people to explore their sexual orientation and gender identity, which means that they're recognizing the free speech implications of a ban. They're saying, we want to ban it, but we will protect the freedom of people to explore their sexual orientation and gender identity. Well, what is conversion therapy if it's not a conversation exploring someone's sexual orientation and gender identity? So if you're saying we're going to carry on allowing people to have those kind of conversations and prayers or whatever, then what are you going to ban? Conversion therapy is talking. So we will see. That's it's a step forward or backward. That they're recognizing the free speech concerns in that. When you get to Liberal Democrats, I'm afraid there's no caveats there at all. They say, quote, "We will ban all forms of conversion therapies and practices," and no caveat at all. One would presume that would include transgender as well, and they will therefore criminalise certain types of conversations, no question.
Will it include children who think they're a cat? You can't talk them back from that neither, I wonder.
Well, exactly. Yes. I mean, this is how absurd it is. You're quite right. Yes. It's absurd enough that clinicians feel they can't challenge a child in their gender identity.
I know. And I suppose the other thing wrapping around all of this is they're just manifestos. And, at the end of the day, when all's said and done, there's a lot more said than done. And who knows what they're going to actually deliver, whichever party gets in once they're in power, because that's often a complete, divergence, as we've found from manifesto promises anyway.
Yes, although, the manifesto is what they're being elected on. It's what they'll be held to. It's what they'll be asked about in the next election. Did you keep your promises and all of that? So it doesn't matter what they say in it. And there's a lot gone into, imagine the battle in the Conservative Party about, are we going to promise to ban conversion therapy or not? And after whatever political battle in internal wrangling there was in there, they ended up deciding to, shy back from it, not to promise it, but, and to say there are real issues here and stuff. That matters. It makes a big difference. And it means if the Conservatives get into power, they would not prioritise it, put it that way. Whereas Liberal Democrats would clearly prioritise it quite high, and Labour would prioritise it medium because they recognise there are issues there. So it does indicate the priorities of the parties. And obviously the individual candidates, are also to be considered and may think somewhat differently, but they're being elected on this platform. And so it matters what the manifestos say. I agree. What actually happens in practice may well not be what the manifestos say.
Yeah, let's see what happens and see what majorities people get and see what else is going to happen in terms of opposition. It's all very interesting. Tim Dieppe, Head of Public Policy, Christian Concern, very grateful for your time. Keep up the brilliant work.
Thank you.